such a pleasure, such a delight, and such an honor to be in the presence of the beneficiaries of water.org. I think we have something called the World Water Day, which is one day in 365 days. But we do need water every day. We can't drink one day and then forget about it. But we do use this day to celebrate the work we do, to celebrate the worry we have, to even be a little more careful of what can be done so that the water crisis doesn't become a truly problematic thing. So we all know that water is a fundamental resource, yet it's scarce. Fresh water is a problem. Sanitation is a problem. And we are all worried about it. And what do we do about it? Cummins takes it forward by partnering with partners like Sudhir, and then makes a contribution, makes an effort to see what we can do. Can we solve the problem on our own? No, we cannot. But maybe we can make 2% difference, 3% difference, 5% maybe, if you are lucky. So that's what we are trying to do today, to see how we can make a difference together with partners like water.org. So let me start with you, Sudhir. Can you share an overview of the global Indian water situation? I will not call it crisis yet. The challenges that you face and how this impacts community health and well-being for the society.
First of all, thank you, Ashish, for inviting, and Jim for inviting water.org and to have this dialogue. And thankful to the audience as well, who has spared some time from your busy schedule and came here and join us to understand about the water. And I'm sure you already know a lot about it, but we can have some conversations that can help all of us to reach to the place where what we call within water.org, to help the people at the base of the economic pyramid to get access of water and sanitation within our lifetime. That's what our mission and vision. And interestingly, when I was entering into the building, I was so inspired. Somehow I have not seen mission and vision earlier, but your mission and vision starts with making lives better, and second word comes innovation. That's what the summary of your mission is. That is very much aligned what world needed and what we are also trying to do. And I think when you said, like, I'll not call it crisis, but I'll say like crisis has already started. If we say the Chennai, Bangalore situations, and it started with Cape Town and a lot of other cities in the world. So what I'll give you the glimpse of how the situation is as of now. So the global water crisis, it's a multifaceted issue that impacts billions of people. And Saujanya already helped me to introduce water.org, so I'll not repeat like what we are and what we do. But let's see the gravity of the situation. There are around 2.2 billion people who lack access to safe water. And that's not a small number. There are 3.6 billion people who lack access to safely managed sanitation. So these are the people who are struggling for basic, what we call the fundamental rights of water and sanitation. Now, let's come to India. And India, we have almost 18% of the world population. But what we are looking at, we have only 4% of the fresh water. And this lack of access is creating a lot of problems, including the diseases, including the livelihood impacts. So a lot of problems we are looking in our lifetime because of the lack of access to water. Now let's see these numbers around India, what we talked about, 2.2 billion and 3.6 billion at a world level. These numbers for India, it reflects somewhere around 35 million people lack access to safe water and 678 million people lack access to safely managed sanitation or to a safe toilet. So that's where we are. This situation is really getting worse day by day, and I think we need to stand up. And so Ashish mentioned, like, this is the time when, from the Cummins side, there's a commitment, from definitely water.org side, there's a commitment, and we are close to reach to 1 million people there. So if we summarize this crisis, so this is the women's crisis. Women spend almost 200 million hours on a daily basis to collect water. Women and girls spend 300 million hours just to relieve themselves. And these are the big numbers that can be converted into the economic opportunities. So this is the women's crisis. And if we look at the health crisis, This is our biggest health crisis. Nearly 1 million people die every year because of water, sanitation, and hygiene related diseases. Third thing that I would like to emphasize on this is the children's education crisis. Because if you'll see, and mainly in the rural areas, mainly women and children, they go and fetch water and keeping them away from school and the play. And last but not least, it's the economic crisis. The time spent to fetch water and for the sanitation, that costs billions of dollars. So if we have these excess at household level, we may save billions of dollars. At one point of time, there was one economist calculated these numbers for India, and they came close to 4.5% of the total GDP, and that's huge. So that's the gravity of the situation, what we are looking at. Let me quote our one of co-founder, Matt Damon, who said, like, you will never solve poverty without solving water and sanitation. And I was really thrilled to know, like, Cummins already, we are organizing almost 56 events around World Water Day, and that's a big thing because the awareness. Once we create that awareness, people come forward for the solutions. I was looking at the theme. So World Water Day started in 1993, and after that there were a lot of themes like better water, better jobs. That was one of the themes that really worked well. This year, the value, the last year 24, when we saw the theme was around water for prosperity and peace, and now it comes from the state. So let me quote the John F. Kennedy, who said, if someone would solve the water crisis, definitely deserve 2 Nobel Prizes, one for peace and one for science. So it's that critical issue to solve, because these challenges again are compounded by rapid urbanization, then climate change that is already knocked our doors, and inadequate infrastructure. So now addressing these issues would be really critical, what Ashish mentioned, to improve community health and overall well-being of the community. So that's how I see the situation, Ashish.
Thank you, Sudhir. Just adding to what you just said, since you quoted Kennedy, would you agree to the quote which I heard recently, that the next world war would be fought over fresh water? Is it that bad?
Yeah, the situation is really that bad, because if we look at these numbers in terms of the 2.2 billion people, and if we really see, and here we do have some beneficiaries as well, maybe I'll talk about some stories how the women are not able to get even 20 liters of water on a daily basis, where in few areas people are using the same water to drink, to bath, to wash their clothes, and that's where they are becoming aware like how much this resource is going to be critical, because we can't replace water with anything else. Maybe we can live without food for some time, we can live without basic essential other amenities, but without water we can't live. So definitely if we will not act fast, then the situations like all I mentioned earlier, Cape Town, Bangalore, Chennai will happen, then definitely there is no other way than the war. The people will try to get those assets under their control.
Thank you, Sudhir. Jim, first of all, thank you for flying down for this. For those of you who don't know, Jim came down this week on our special request for this event. So I just wanted to thank him that since he's the custodian of all community work for Cummins Inc., it means a lot for us. But coming to Sudhir's point, Jim, could you say a little more on how we in Cummins sort of take initiative for this crisis, as Sudhir very clearly mentioned? What do we do in terms of approach, and what are the outcomes we are looking for?
Ashish, thank you, and thanks for those kind words. And Sudhir, thank you for joining. Your words are evidence as to why we're very glad to have you as a partner. I want to extend a warm welcome to our invited guests. Thank you for being here. Those also from water.org and everyone in the room, thanks for joining. I want to start with our approach, as you asked. and pull the lens back a moment and describe how we think about approach to solving problems such as the one you described and many others in our community. So at Cummins, we have always felt that the health of our communities and the health of our company is inseparable. Health of our company is dependent on the health of our communities and vice versa. This has been a foundational belief that we've had throughout our history. And for more than 70 years, we have thought very seriously about how do we leverage our resources, time, talent, treasure, to affect positive change in our communities. And over that time, we've come to believe that we should focus on the intersection of company imperatives and community imperatives. And in that way, we would stay aligned with what was important to the company, but also be able to leverage our skills in areas that we had logical ways to add value. And so that's how we've thought about our approach to community in general. And what that's led to is our 3 strategic priority areas that we focus in our communities: education, equity, and the environment. And so once you get that framework, then we can start thinking about how we've approached our environment. And again, this intersection being important to us starts with what is the company imperative relative to the environment. And that will lead us to where we should focus in our communities. And so most everyone in the room knows that if you think about the environment and what is the company imperative, you quickly come to our company strategy, which is Destination Zero. And that has to do with trying to reduce the primary cause of climate change by reducing the emissions of our products, as well as to move to zero emissions of our own and those of our customers and helping them do that. And so the starting point is to focus on climate change. And what is the primary cause of climate change? Emissions. So then you switch the lens, think about the intersection of the two of where we can leverage our knowledge internally, and it brings us into the community. And after a long period of time and lots of study, we started to realize that while climate change is the cause, the primary effect in our communities is water. Water is the crisis in our communities caused by the same situation that we're trying to address as a company, and then you have the perfect overlap. So we have initiatives around the world. We have thousands of them. The one that Sudhir is a partner in was about 3 years ago. We launched Cummins Water Works to focus on water as our primary focus area, our objective being to strengthen communities through sustainable water. We focus our initiatives in 3 areas: water quality, water quantity, and water sanitation and health, or WASH. And we found a tremendous partner to launch this program with in water.org, and we've benefited ever since. I'll give one example of an initiative that then falls into that approach right here in India, which many are familiar with, but it's a marquee example of going into the community, understanding the problems, developing relationships, partnership to solve change, and that's our Monsoon Resilient Maharashtra initiative. We've been about 6 years working on this. Started with a water crisis. Many of you will remember at the time there was huge monsoons causing huge drought, affecting crop in the state. 60% of the villages were experiencing severe drought. The crop yields had dropped 50%, and people remember there was a crisis in terms of suicides among the farmers. So we put together an initiative to try to address this, got subject matter experts on land management and farming practices, partnered with our communities, put those in place, provided the resources, and the impact has been tremendous. We have affected 64 villages to date. The crop yields have gone up 70%. We've planted 80,000 trees. We've created 4 billion gallons of water benefits in our communities. And most importantly, the incomes of the farmers have increased 150%. So that's just one example of our approach. Once we got to water, we find the partners, we go into our communities and try to affect positive change, and there's hundreds more, but that's a good example.
Great. Let me request you, Jim, to unpack that thought a little bit. So when you say we work at the intersection of climate change, equity, and water, why do we need a holistic approach? Why can't we do a sequential or one at a time kind of approach? And I will ask the same to Sudhir, but why don't you go first?
Sudhir, you mentioned several intersectionality in your comments of the environment, gender, economy, and that begins to answer the question. The setup is in philanthropy, there's a very important concept, which is intersectionality. The way I described our focus within our company is the 3 areas of education, equity, and the environment. That helps us focus our energies, but it suggests these are separate and distinct. The fact of the matter that social issues in our communities are super complicated, and they're not separate and distinct. They have large overlap. I'll give an example. You can think of education being related to the environment. How do we educate people? You can easily think, and Sudhir had a great example of the intersection of gender and the environment. I had a colleague recently, he's in the audience today, tell me that water is a gender issue. And you've given perfect examples of it. And I'll describe one situation I came across recently. There was a visual that left a big impact on me. And this was a project that we got engaged in, and this was a video that one of our team members took as a before so that we could contrast the after on the effect that we had. And the video was of a very large communal well that had been created for a village that didn't have its own water source. 2 kilometers was the distance, so that people had to walk to get water every day that they used for household and cooking and bathing and for their small plots of crops. And the visual of this, maybe 20 to 30 feet across, very large well, and there were women all around. And they were fetching the water for the day. And they were pulling, they had large silver water containers. And they were almost ornamental. They were somewhat beautiful. But they would tie them to a rope. And the picture was women and girls just pulling up the water, putting it to the side, down they go, every age to startlingly young. And then they would collect the water, they put it on their heads, and they would walk this long path back to the village. And so that was much of what Sudhir had said, and this is a gender issue, but the most striking thing, which just bothers me just to discuss it, is that the video then moved slowly, but not very far, to one side, to reveal right next to this communal well was a cricket pitch where all the young boys were playing. So they had downtime, they were enjoying their sports, and the women were working, fetching the water. And then you pull the lens back, and that affects access to education, access to the economy and jobs. So back to your question of, are these separate and distinct? The fundamental answer is you can affect change in small ways if you do them separate and distinct. But to have large change, positive change in our communities, you have to recognize they're interrelated. You have to address them in a more holistic way. And that's when you can really start to have positive impact in our communities.
Great. So do you want to add something to that before I move to the next question, please?
Yeah, no, I think Jim beautifully covered around the gender, but maybe let me add the lens of climate here. And one very scary word nowadays is the climate refugees. And in India itself, what we are looking at, almost 45 million climate refugees would be there by 2050. And the shift of these people would be mainly because of not having a proper water, and at the same time other facilities that, or say the enterprises or the employment, those are related to the water. We have done a survey last year with our 60 financial institutions globally, and we tried to understand from them how their portfolio is going to behave if they look at it from the water perspective. And they all came up with the same answer. Like they generally use in finance this AUM, the asset under management. So they say like the people will move, and with them our asset under management will also move. So that would be the biggest risk for us. Although this was the lens of a financial institution who were looking at their loss in the profit and loss statement. But at the same time, to me, what was occurring, like the people are shifting, people are losing their base, and they are shifting to somewhere else in search of employment, in search of the livelihood and their existence itself. There are a lot of people have shifted from Uttarakhand because of the floods and because of unnatural calamities. Those are really coming hard due to the climate change. There are few places where we are looking at, okay, those used to known as the desert places in Rajasthan. Now there's a lot of water. So this climate change is shifting in such a way that is leaving people homeless, people moving to the different places. So that is one thing we need to understand how we can stop that. Whether the rainwater harvesting initiatives can that stop it, or creating more resilience through water and sanitation for these communities, can that be helpful to become climate resilient folks. So that is one large question that we need to understand, like how we can not stop, but how we can slow down the climate change actions. Because we have to see the mitigation as well as adaptation, both strategies we need to put in the context. So gender already, you covered beautifully. Maybe I can give one or two examples of how this is linked with the gender and the economic. Let me give you the first example on the dignity that touched my heart first time when I joined Water.org from the financial institution. There was a girl who was living near around Chennai, and she went to the college, and she did not return home because there was no toilet at home. And she said, "I'll not come home unless you have the toilet." And she literally came back for 2 years. And then the parents, they built the toilet. And because of that house, everybody got those toilets built up in the whole village, and everybody got the water facility, because you need water for the sanitation facilities as well. And that's where they became, later on when the climate crisis was really huge, but they got that mitigation because of they were having the water and sanitation facilities at their households. So that's how there are a lot of interlinkages, but how these small initiatives are really helping these families, that's where I wanted to stress upon.
Can I expand on one of his
Please.
points? So I want to qualify, my knowledge of water has been learned by experts such as Sudhir. And so, but I do want to expand on one of the things I've learned, which is points to the urgency of the water crisis today. And that would be, there are solutions, there are partners in place, there are companies such as ours that want to partner and affect positive change. But we've got a lot of work ahead. And there's a natural negative cycle that begins to occur. And it's beginning to be large, which is why the urgency of our action. But to just expand a brief moment on the concept of environmental refugees, was that the term you used?
Yeah, climate refugees.
Excuse me, climate refugees. Again, expert, novice.
This is a new terminology that you brought into the market.
But you can appreciate you have a macro dynamic in climate change that's creating a reduction in water availability over time on a large scale. And then you start thinking about the first impact is people begin to move. But then what happens is they move to a location that already has the same dynamic. Their population is already worried about decreasing water, and now you have a population move in. And so there's a multiplier effect on the negative impact of the current situation. So that this crisis exists and it's accelerating. I don't mean to be alarmist. I don't know how we talked about World War III, but we did. But it's important, and that's how we approach it. What are the most important issues in our communities that we have the ability to partner with really smart partners and affect positive change? So that's what I wanted to expand on.
Perfect. So, Sudhir, you have been an ex-banker, a man of numbers, I would assume. How much does financial accessibility have a role to play when you are out to do something like what water.org is doing? How much does access to money and be able to utilize the money properly, how important these issues are, and how do you manage them?
Sure, maybe that brings me, back to, talk about the water.org. We also, started as any philanthropic organization who believed in giving grants and grants for the asset. Then soon we realized whether the grant money is enough to solve the world problems. If you look at one number from the World Bank, what do we need to solve the SDG 6? Well, Jim has made a great point. If we are solving this SDG 6, we are solving a lot of other SDGs. Those are related to gender, climate, partnerships, poverty, and so on. So what World Bank stated, to meet the SDG 6 requirement, we need around $114 billion every year. But we don't have even 1/3 of it. So soon we realize we need to change gears. We need to see how we can help the people, and that's where Gary White came with the concept of water credit. Those are the micro loans, small loans, where there is no direct grants. But what we are doing there, we are helping these micro lending institutions to create this product. We are helping these entities to create the right product, to create the right marketing, because the game of demand supply is pretty interesting. And you also come from both backgrounds of government and banking. So when we need to generate the demand, sometimes looking at the water, color of water, we cannot tell whether iron is on a higher side or it's a fluoride and all. And the people at village, they don't go for any filters and all. They say water is good. But when you tell them with certain tests, water tests, this is fluoride is high, or these are the bacteria there in this water, and then they relate it with their health expenses. Yes, now we need to go for the water filter. So coming back to the finance, so that's where we help these financial institutions to come up with that water. So what that $1 is coming from Cummins, that can unlock maybe $18, $20 through these financial institutions. So if we look at, let's say, let me come back again for the India. There is a report from the Standard Chartered Sustainability for 2030. So they have advised around $192 billion is needed to meet SDG 6. And out of this said, 10% needs to be participated by private sector, that is 19.2. Remaining amount would come from the government. But I suspect, and based on certain recent research and studies, we are looking at this 9-10 is even inclining more towards the private sector. So that's where we do the capacity building of these entities, so that they can have the right products, they can have the right type of collaterals as well. Those we call IEC materials, the information, education, communication. That's where the customer can understand. So this is apart from the financial institution side. But at the same time, look at how the borrowers, they behave. The people at the base of the economic pyramid, they know the solution. For example, we talked about the water filter. Now they know water filter is the solution. But do they have the upfront capital to go and pay and buy that? They don't. that's where the institutions, financial institutions come to the picture. They give the loan to these entities, and not only the microfinance institution, banks, but we have today the beneficiaries or the DDs from the state rural livelihood missions, supported by the government, and the different state governments are supporting. So they go to the bank and they apply for this loan. So at the end of the day, what we were looking at this $114 billion versus what one third is available. Now they are creating their own solutions, and that's where the gap of this financing is becoming a bit narrow. We are able to play the role from our side. Now let me go to this financial institution side again. We started working in India 2004 with a water credit model, and what 1 million people reached, it took almost 10 plus years for us. And then these financial institutions, they came up, we don't have dedicated water and sanitation capital. We can't serve these customers with these loans. And that's where, again, one of the policy initiative that came, and Government of India and Reserve Bank of India really helped us in that way. So they included water and sanitation lending into the priority sector lending. And the priority sector lending, where government and Reserve Bank dictate the banks, like where you need to put some allocations, 40% of your money. So that's where this water and sanitation lending came into the priority sector lending. So banks are now opening up the loans for even these financial institutions through the term loan or a wholesale lending. So borrower, they do have now the options as a water and sanitation loan, and even these microfinance institutions, they can also avail the fundings from the different impact investors, from the multiple sources. One of even Water.org's sister concern organization known as Water Equity. So it was just a coincidence at the time. Matt visited India long back 13-14. So Matt Damon and Gary, and independently every financial institution asked for the help. They asked, like, what do you need? They said, we don't have the dedicated capital. We need a dedicated capital in some form, and that's where Water Equity born. So this whole cycle of the finance, whether starting from borrower to these financial institutions and to lender to these financial institutions, that is really important. And one study that was done by Government of India, that was done by UNICEF, and they have come up with, like, if these loans are these loans are known as consumption loans. These are not an income generating loan. That was another challenge we faced, like how can we bridge this financing gap between borrowers and their facilities. So that study shows if a household can have proper sanitation facility at home, they are saving 50,000 rupees. That would be somewhere around $600 they're saving annually. And that's why we call these income enabling loans. And that's where a lot of bankers got also convinced, like, yes, this income enabling loan can be repaid right as any other income enabling loans. That's where we see this loop is really important, and the finance can come on the table and can help these people who know what the solution they are asking for.
Okay. Very briefly, Sudhir, can you say a little more to this audience here about SDG 6, or is that Matt Damon's latest movie?
Okay, so maybe what I'll do, rather than explaining SDG 6, because I'm sure, like, we read newspapers, we watch a lot of television, so we are aware about water and sanitation crisis. But what Watch.org or what we does, we focus on household level water and sanitation facilities. And every household does require the water supply. When we are talking about these numbers, the people who are not having the pipe water connections at home, the people who are not having the water quality, was Jim emphasized, so they don't have the water quality, water filters at home. So SDG 6 aims for safe water and safely managed sanitation. So every household does have the supply of safe water, and that's where, if we see the Jal Jeevan Mission, that an initiative from Government of India is aimed for providing the water to each and every household, a tap connection. Similarly, there was Swachh Bharat Mission that came in 2014, and that has really focused on building at that time almost 11 million toilets were built. So having a sanitation facility at each and every household. Now, where we are facing a problem, and there is a lot of gap, what we talked earlier about the numbers. Even during the Swachh Bharat mission, the toilet builds, the government provided 12,000 rupees as a subsidy. It was a subsidy amount, it was not the cost of the toilet. And many of the people misunderstood it as the cost of the toilet. So the toilets they build now, almost 20 to 30% toilets they need retrofitting. So they are many of those are not in use, and that's where the SRLMs has played a bigger role. And now this number I'm talking about a couple of years back, now that number has improved significantly. So those retrofitting is required very little amount of 6,000 or 10,000 rupees, but the people at the base of economic pyramid, they don't have that upfront money to invest even for the retrofitting. So once and one calculation that came around 60,000 crores is required just for these retrofitting. So once this retrofitting will be done, water quality is one of the bigger concerns. So people will have either the water filters or government gives that water or filtered water or drinkable water, I would say that way. Then maybe we will be close to reach towards meeting SDG 6 goals.
Okay. So, Jim, why partnerships? Why do we do these partnerships? Is it scale? Is it efficiency? Is it effectivity?
I would say it's all the above, but I would start by describing another important concept in philanthropy, and that's collective action. And so one of the things about approaching these very complicated social issues, of which we try our best to affect positive change across a wide number of them, whether it's housing or hunger, whether it's gender equity or racial equity, whether it's education in early childhood or worker retraining, or now returning to the environment, we focus on water. These are very complicated issues. And the larger they become and the more serious any entity is on trying to approach it, you realize you cannot affect change alone. These are too complicated and too big, and no one has all the skills required. So step one is you start moving into a more collaborative environment that requires these partnerships to affect real change. That's where we are now, and as we try to do more and more and affect change. There's a concept it's pretty accessible, of leverage. If you're acting on your own, you can have a one-to-one impact. Think about going to clean up a park or any kind of physical. Any of us could go out, we work all day, we have an effect that's kind of one-to-one. Then you start partnering and moving in the direction of working with a single entity. Maybe that leverage becomes one unit of effort has an impact of 10. And for the really big problems, you find very smart people like water.org, and you can start to leverage 1 to 100. And your impact is much greater. I just want to expand on Sudhir's example, our experience on the leverage available with the model they have perfected in terms of $1 in and the leverage out is for all of our grant money that goes there, for every $1 we offer to support their smart efforts, we've calculated $28 goes into solving water issues in our community. That's great leverage. And I'll give an example of the work that they do. If I go back to the visual image that I started with of the community that had the communal well, with the women that were preoccupied every day with getting water for their water needs, and the gender issue next door of the boys playing their sport. So fast forward, we can only do so much to affect change in that situation. We can see that there is something we want to affect. But we partner with water.org. They develop relationships with financial institutions they developed the financial logic to create these microloans, which we leverage in that community to then purchase the PVC piping and the labor in order to lay pipes over that 2 kilometers, bring water into the community, build local wells, water storage tanks, and taps into the homes. It also is now used to irrigate their crops, which has increased their yields and increased their income, and best, allowed the women to work and the young girls to go to school. And so this is the multiplier effect that's available if you think hard about the problem you're trying to solve. You recognize its complexity as such, you can't work alone. You find super capable, experienced partners. You bring your resources, you leverage their subject matter expertise and their relationships, and you can find real change, and that's what we're doing.
Okay, thank you for that. In closing, thank you, Jim.
Ashish?
Thank you for doing this. Thank you for coming down for us. And thank you for being the custodian of the Cummins communities. We really, really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhir. Great to have you here. Hold on, I have a point. Great to have you here. You see, the hall is not entirely full. It's a little 60 to 70% full. So next time, can we get Matt Damon to come and join us here? We can sell tickets for the seats. So sorry to put you on the spot, but it will be amazing if we can have him here in the next event of Impact Dialogues. So thank you for all your work, thank you for all your effort, and thank you for being here. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for wonderful moderation.